Okay, guys, we are nearly finished with our lesson today. We're going to finish off with example number 4, which is factoring by grouping with additive inverses. So we're going to throw in this little concept of additive inverses into the mix. What an additive inverse is, it's basically just, I'll give you an example. 5 and -5 are additive inverses. So if you take any number and throw a negative sign in front of it, that new thing that you have is its additive inverse. You can add those two things up and you'll get to 0. That's kind of what the definition is. So for example, let's read along here. It is helpful to be able to recognize when binomials are additive inverses of each other. For example, 5 minus x equals -1 times x minus 5. So the binomials they're speaking about is 5 minus x and x minus 5. Those are additive inverses because when we add a negative sign to this one, we just get the other one, right? -1 times x is negative x, showing up right there. And -1 times -5 is positive 5, showing up right there. So they are additive inverses. We're going to find an additive inverse in this problem, and it'll be helpful to understand that. Okay, so let's factor our polynomial here. We once again have a 4-term polynomial where we do not have the same variable in all 4 terms, and it doesn't look like we have a common factor for our coefficients either. So I'm going to create groups where I see similar things. Like, for example, I see m's in there. And here, there's not a p in both of them. But what can we divide both of these numbers by? We can divide them both by 4. Okay, so those are our 2 groups. They've got these 2 groups down here that we just chose. Now we're going to factor out the common factors. What is common in both of these? Well, there is an m that's common. And we can divide both these numbers by 3. What do we get when we divide 21 by 3? Well, we just get 7 left over. And if we have this minus 3mp and we factored out the 3m part of it, all we have left is the minus p. Okay, so take a look, make sure that makes sense. So 3m times 7 would be our 21m. 3m times minus p would be minus 3mp. Okay, now over on the right side, we're going to factor out a 4 here. 4 was what was common. So when we factor out a 4, we're left with p, right? Just p. 4 times p is 4p. And 28 with a 4 factored out leaves us with minus 7. So minus 28, take out 4, we get minus 7. All right. Now, what's the problem here? Well, we're going to have our 2 terms, our red term and our blue term. So that's good. Good news. We've gone from 4 terms down to 2. However, bad news, we don't have a common factor in those 2 groups, where before we always were ending up with the same factor in these 2 boxes. Now we don't. But we do have 2 factors that are additive inverses to each other. So just like 5 minus x was the inverse of x minus 5, 7 minus p is the inverse of p minus 7. So if I take this 7 minus p and I factor out a -1 from it, if you look right here, that's what's being done here. They're saying if we factor out a -1, then we end up with -1 times p minus 7. So that's what we're going to put in that box right there. We're going to put in -1 because our 7 minus p is the same thing as -1 times p minus 7. -1 times p minus 7. Okay, so now we're doing a little better. Now, what are we going to do next? Well, this stuff over here is going to stay the same. We're not going to touch that. But what we're going to do is we have 3m times -1 times p minus 7. I think we're just going to put these 2 together. Okay, we're going to multiply our 3m and our -1. So we're going to end up with -3m. Okay, now we're in better shape. So now we have 2 terms where we have a common factor in those 2 terms. That common factor is that p minus 7. So in the end, let's do a new color at the very end of this. In the end, we get an answer where we have p minus 7 being multiplied by 2 things. It's being multiplied by negative 3m, and by 4. Right? We had p minus 7 multiplied by negative 3m here, and we had p minus 7 times 4 there. Now, the one last thing that I'm going to do, just because in general in math, what we're trying to do is we're trying to describe things in the world as simply as possible. Sometimes it can feel kind of complicated when we're doing math, but the purpose is to make it as simple as possible. One of the things that we can simplify is the amount of things we're writing in our answer. So if we want to write less symbols, if we don't want to write a negative sign and a positive sign, instead of negative 3m plus 4, we'll just switch those around. We'll just say 4 minus 3m. Okay, that just has one less symbol, which makes it the simplest way to write out our answer.